just like anybody running an attraction, like everyone thinks it's so much fun. Oh, I'm going to build this whole thing and it's going to be great. I mean, you even talk to your friends and families like, you work where? You do what? And when I was starting camp, they were like, "Oh, this is going to be amazing. That's so much fun." Right? I'm like, "No, it's not going to be fun." It's like 11 buildings and it takes 3.5 days to cut the grass, dude. Like it's just like every, lodging, clogged toilets and, turnover. I got to clean all these rooms in the same day because it's actually not very easy to run a physical facility, but it is the most impactful.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
All right.
Yes. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
So, as a parent of two small children, have you ever said, "Because I said so"?
I really want to answer that question by saying no, I absolutely have never said that. And while I cannot think of any specific examples, I cannot confidently and definitively say that I have never said it, but I try to always give a reason.
I'm sure. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
Why do you ask?
Well, because today we actually get to talk to Alex Sheen, who is the founder and CEO of Because I Said I Would. But when you and Nathan Caldwell and I were together, we mistakenly said, "It's because I said so," which is a completely different message than "Because I Said I Would."
It is, yes. Thank you for bringing that up.
You're
And
welcome.
I said it completely innocently and mistakenly. And even when we drafted the questions for this interview, I also innocently and mistakenly said because I said so in it. You caught it before we sent it to Alex.
Yes. Well,
So,
and I don't think it's too far out of the realm of possibility to say that's the phrase that comes to mind because we've heard it so often.
yeah.
Because I said so. Well, it's because I said so. And whether it's from a leader, from a parent, from whoever, we've heard that a lot. But what we may not have heard as much is, "I'm doing this because I said I would," which is a completely different message and one that we got to hear a lot about from Alex Sheen today.
Yes, and that is one thing that I've been thinking about a lot since we got to see Alex speak at the Florida Attractions Association conference around early June or so, and I have been thinking about conversations that I have had with my children, particularly my older one, my younger one. She's early in talk. I mean, she talks very well, but we don't have as distinctive conversations as my 5.5-year-old. And I think about promises that I make to him, and I think about really the follow up on that. And ever since seeing Alex speak, I've been thinking about what those conversations are like. And oftentimes it's maybe at bedtime where he wants to continue to read more books before saying goodnight, which is something that is relatively common of toddlers and young children who want to continue to extend and prolong bedtime. So if I say something like, "We're going to put this away, but we're going to read it in the morning, I promise," then I remember saying that shortly after seeing Alex speak, and I needed to make sure that I followed up with that in the morning to say, "Okay, I am going to make sure I read this book tomorrow morning because I said I would." So it has, the idea of promises seems very simple and seems very obvious, but once you really start thinking about it, you can think about really how they work their way into your own personal accountability.
Absolutely. And I think back to all the times when I was in a leadership role at the various parks that I worked at, and I would say, "I'm going to do something," even if I didn't use the words, "I promise I'm going to do it." I think employees hear that. If they hear a leader say, I'm going to check on your schedule for you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to, do whatever I'm going to do, to them, that's a promise. And we should be treating it that way. So, Because I Said I Would is a social movement and nonprofit dedicated to the betterment of humanity through promises made and kept. So, it's not a very, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to make a joke of it, but it's very it's a big ask, right? To have such an impact on humanity, but they really have been. So since Alex has started this, they've given I think some 15 million of these cards, these promise cards for people to simply say, "I'm making a promise. I'm going to do something simply because I said I would." Absolutely, for people to keep their word. And we got to talk to Alex about a lot of things today. One of those, of course, is making and keeping promises and how that can be such an important part of our own accountability.
Yeah, and one of the things too, an overarching theme of the conversation and one of the overarching premises of Because I Said I Would has to do with resiliency and mental health. And that is something that ties directly into the promise cards that have enabled people to improve their own lives, improve their well-being, and focus on their mental health and their resiliency through making promises to themselves and keeping themselves accountable for it.
And one of the other things that Alex really talks a lot about and I think contributes to being able to make these promises is recognizing when we're having negative thoughts or negative thinking and how that can really be a downward spiral for us. And if we get ourselves out of that negative downward spiral, then we can really focus on what is it that I can do? What's one small action that I can take today that's going to help me achieve my goal? And, not to steal Alex's thunder, but he's talking about people that are making promises to, improve their health so that they can be around for their children or, things that really, really matter in life.
Yeah. And Alex is an attraction pro himself because I Said I Would has a summer camp, has a camp in Central Ohio in the Columbus area that's 92 acres, which is bigger than Disneyland. And he counts it as an attraction because he talks about the different activities and things that you can do there, but it ties directly into his mission of resilience and mental health and his entire focus of this amazing nonprofit that he's created and that he has inspired many people from.
So is it time to get to this interview because we said we would?
If you didn't say that, I was going to say, why should we do it? And I'll just tack on because we said so that we would do this interview with Alex Sheen.
Hey, Alex, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time. Can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, as an organization, Because I Said I Would focuses on resiliency skills and mental health habits. As the founder and CEO of this organization, I'm just trying to keep things moving along. But I'm so excited to talk to you, Matt and Josh, because we have a 92-acre camp and retreat center, which is its own kind of attraction in a way, a lot to take care of with that much property. In fact, I remember when we bought it, looking into the size of Disneyland versus our camp. And our camp is actually larger than the footprint of Disneyland. But as it relates to, how this organization started, and a little background about myself, it was inspired by my dad. My father was a man of his word. If he said he was going to be there for you, he showed up. He was a handshake means something kind of guy. And it turns out when it comes to keeping promises, like a lot of people don't do that anymore. They don't, put forward that resiliency to follow through when it's tough. And my dad, that was his go-to. That's what he did well. Unfortunately, it is inspired by the memory of my dad. My father was diagnosed with stage 4 small cell lung cancer, and on September 4th of 2012, he passed away in our home in Central Ohio. I was asked by my family to give my father's eulogy, to speak to his greatest characteristic, his greatest quality as a man. And I kept coming back to that thought of keeping a promise. So I created what I called a promise card, just a 1 cent piece of paper. You write a promise on the card, you give it to the person you're making that commitment to. You tell them, when I fulfill this promise, I earn that card back. That's a symbol of my honor, my respect. It's my property. I'm coming back for that. When you fulfill the promise, you keep it as a reminder that you're a person of your word. Well, I made a post to social media saying that I would send 10 of these cards to anybody, anywhere in the world at no cost to anyone, which is the dumbest financial decision I've ever made in my entire life. We have distributed over 15.5 million promise cards to over 178 countries around the world, and by request only. And so that's kind of where the story began, Matt and Josh, with just this memory of my father, and I clicked a button and kind of went crazy. But ultimately, the charity isn't about a card or some guy who likes to yap, or whatever. It really is about the resiliency skills and mental health habits that we need to face the adversities of life. Things like stress management, the four types of self-control, understanding negative thinking patterns. And so that's a little bit of background about, how this whole journey began. And then we would run into each other, Matt, at, an association of folks who have attraction facilities, theme parks, all kinds of even nonprofit community gardens, and it was awesome just kind of getting to know people there.
Yeah, yeah, it was great to be able to see you speak very recently at the Florida Attractions Association conference and really get to hear your story. And it is absolutely just incredible and just so inspiring. And I wonder if we could touch on kind of that moment. You talk about it being inspired from the memory of your father, and then creating the card and then offering to send it out. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of that piece of it, and maybe that light bulb that kind of went from really the bridge from inspiration to actually launching it into action?
Yeah, at the time, Josh, I was working at an enterprise software company. I worked in what they call the office of the CEO, which was I was an innovation manager and then corporate strategy lead. I worked with the mergers and acquisition team that was also in that department. And the reason why I give that context is, change management was such a huge part of strategy. Like you could come up with the best product, the most clever campaign, whatever. But if you can't get 1,000 people in this billion-dollar enterprise to row together, it's like I'd actually rather take a subpar idea that's executed than a genius idea that you just can't get people to go along with. So a lot of what was innovation and corporate strategy wasn't what most people thought it was, right? It was just like, could you get people to go along with a plan and execute their part of it? So in that, I would work with all these different change management models and things like that. So kind of creating a moment of positive accountability between two parties was just a part of my job, coincidentally. And so I knew that if I gave my father's eulogy and, created something called the Sheen Foundation or something, like people wouldn't necessarily attach to that thought, because I mean, how many sad days have we had at funerals, you and I, where, we have this moment together and then we just move on and nothing changes, right? If that promise card said, Al Sheen Foundation in the corner instead of because I said I would it have ever gone anywhere? I honestly don't think so. I mean, for whatever reason, you and I, the human experience, we're a little bit self-centered, right? It's this thought that like I kind of care about what I care about. So I called it because I said I would, in reflection that people hold themselves a little bit more accountable when they attach their personality, their pride, their things to it. But of course, I was trying to get people to make positive promises. So it's almost taking this self-centered energy that we, of course, all are going to have, and almost like deflecting that off into a positive thing. Because if you look at this shirt, I mean, it is very sort of hyper American, right? Like because I said I would, like individualistic, but because I said I would volunteer for a nonprofit that I care about, because I said I would take care of my heart health so that I'd be there for my kids, or whatever promises our supporters would make. It took that energy and put it into a positive direction. So that's kind of where it started from. I knew I needed to create a moment, an interaction between two people that was physically more than words, because often those just kind of float off into the wind. The average American speaks 15,942 words, according to a study from the University of Arizona at Tucson, a day, like 15,942 words a day. And so we got to find a way to like lock that in a little more.
So, Alex, I'm wondering if we can talk about, quite frankly, the simplicity, and I have my cards right here, um, but the simplicity of the mechanism that is the promise card. Because I know you're a techie, right? And there's a lot of tech around us all the time. We've got our phones and things like that. Why is it more powerful for us to write this down on a card like that than it is like to put a note in our phone? Like,
Yeah.
why do you think that's more powerful?
Well, I think a lot of people see promises made, promises kept, promises broken through this lens of like you're a good person or you're a bad person, which is understandable. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Like the person didn't honor their word, they don't have strong character, and that can often be the case. But what I would discover after 15 plus million promise cards is that a lot of times people were breaking these smaller promises simply because they forgot. Like it was no more complex than the fallibility of human memory, right? And so, Matt and Josh, when is the last time you literally wrote down a commitment for anything of any kind on any kind of piece of paper and gave it to anyone, right? In not only recently, but ever in your whole entire life, right? So I didn't have any sort of genius behind this card. I didn't actually even think it through that much. I was just trying to say goodbye to my dad, and then it just exploded into this thing. But I would actually, over time, other people would tell me why it was clever, and that was one of the things. It's like I've never done this ever once. And you'd be talking to someone who's already retired, and I think if anything, it just kind of creates this. Oh yeah, I got to do that. I said I would do that, and brings a level of seriousness to a conversation that honestly, a lot of times you can't even tell if the other person really means it. Or are they just trying to get through a conversation? If I said, "Man, Josh, you got to come out to the camp, right? It's 45 miles east of Columbus, and Josh, I already see your Cedar Point. You just kind of swing over, come see it. It'd be, oh yeah, we'd love to do." But if I were to kind of freeze frame that moment, right? Zach Morris, sort of like for reference lost on younger audience members. But if I just stop the show and then be like, well, is Matt and John, are they really going to come out? It's like, nah, they're just trying to be nice. Okay. And then start the show again. We just don't really expect these commitments a lot of times to be fulfilled, and we roll over it. So that moment of seriousness where I hand you a card is just a little unique.
I'm thinking of this through, the lens of our audience and, leaders within the attractions industry who are regularly serving not only guests, but, their team members as well, who they're really supporting, and thinking about ways of kind of creating accountability in leadership. And that could be, promises that they make. That could be maybe it's a scheduling request, or maybe it could be something that kind of enhances their work environment, or something like that. And trying to look at it kind of through, maybe not to say like through a total corporate lens, because it's not intended to really be that way, but in the business environment, what do you see from that as far as kind of the importance of leaders really making promises to their team and then being able to keep themselves accountable for delivering on those?
Yeah, and Josh, you're absolutely right. With that comment, like as a 501(c)(3) charity, our nonprofit is not focused on KPIs and widgets and that kind of production, but obviously promises are there every day. And when we have someone who comes to that moment where they say to themselves, you know what, I don't keep my promises to my family, but not to work, but not to the nonprofit I care about, to my friends, but not to a stranger. You know what I'm saying? Like you get to a moment where you say, no, this is part of my code of honor. Like I follow through on my promises everywhere. And so of course this is going to bleed into organizations. But interestingly enough, it is actually an opposite effect that of best practices going in a different direction that I don't think people follow. And what I mean by that is in work, we create calendars and project records and spreadsheets, and we have deadlines and we have check-ins. Do we do any of these things for our personal health, our mental health, our relationships with our friends, our family members, our spouses? Do you see what I'm saying? Like there has been billions, trillions of dollars poured into best practices on getting over a finish line, right? For a goal at work. And we routinely use that all the time. But then when it comes to a personal goal, a promise, that calendar is completely empty over here, but entirely full over here. Deadlines everywhere, check-ins, nothing over. You know what I'm saying? So I think that a lot of best practices from the corporate universe actually needs to be echoed into, honestly, and I'll just kind of speak to my own philosophy for a second. What's more important, right? Your physical health, your mental health, the charities you care about, your community, right? Like we need to do that over here. And so then the opposite, again, because whatever I like to yap a lot, is that there are best practices in mental health, stress management, things a therapist would tell you, understanding negative thinking patterns. All of these best practices over here in our personal life somehow are nowhere in the corporate universe, where we're not talking about stress management and how to handle mental health challenges, right? So I think there's an interesting Venn diagram at play.
And Alex, I'm wondering if we can kind of peel back the onion on your personal journey because you started off, you sent out these cards, you didn't know it was going to go viral, as they like to say, right? And now you find yourself leading this organization. So, what has that leadership kind of accountability journey been for you as you've kind of built the company?
Yeah, not fun, and that, I mean, guys, I was talking about my dad. The eulogy is about my father, not about me. You see what I'm saying? And so even looking at why I called it because I said I would. My dad never said these words, by the way. He never said, "Oh, Alex, I did that because I said." Never. I don't recall it even once. What he did say, though, as an angry Asian dad, was because your mom said she was gonna, because your brother said, because you said, right? And I was like, Dad, why are you so upset all the time, right? That kind of reflection. But as I lost him in my life and was writing his eulogy, I realized like Dad was upset because he kept his promises and nobody else did. You know, he followed through, and for the life of him, he could not understand why you would not do something that you had the time for, that you were capable of, that you said you were going to do, that someone was relying on you. Like he couldn't get it, you know? And so my dad, if he could see me now, would be just laughing. Like he would be like, you that's not you. You don't do anything you say you're gonna do, you know? So it was almost this comical journey I had to go on that I thought I would lay at bed at night and thought it was like some kind of curse, right? Because when you're an influencer, which I hate that term, but it's like it is what it is. You've got hundreds of thousands of followers. You're literally. I give school assembly speeches, right? Imagine if on the local news, because they said a guy doesn't follow through his promises or doesn't do something, of good character. I be I became hyper focused on this reality that I had to honor all my promises to the best of my ability. And of course, I make mistakes like anybody would, but I have to have a batting average better than just about anybody. And if I didn't, well, then you shouldn't even start, Alex. You know, um, that old quote from Spider-Man's uncle, with great power comes great responsibility. So I started to go on a journey where I wouldn't just mail promise cards, but I made promises like I'm going to walk 240 miles across the entire state of Ohio in 10 days as part of this charitable promise. Volunteer at 52 different nonprofits, one each week for 52 weeks in a row. I've given $9 million to the organization. 100% of my speaking fees have always gone to the charity. I make about as much as a high school teacher or less, depending on what state you're in, for the entire time of this journey. So it's, I had to test myself. And the last thing I'll say about that is I think it actually ended up being better. And I'm not really trying to just be positive. I think it ended up being better that I was not good at my promises and I'd have to struggle through that journey because I can very sincerely understand our supporters who can't follow through, who aren't sure what to do, who just feel stuck, like it's right in front of them, but they can't get up and after it, you know? And And that would help me understand how to explain some of these tactics in a way that was easier to adopt, maybe. So yeah, it was quite a journey to get to where I'm at.
I've got to imagine the challenge of that transformation that now you are building a personal brand based on promises and that outwardly facing Alex is the promise guy. Alex is the guy who talks about making and keeping promises, which really puts so much weight and responsibility, like you said, great power and great responsibility on yourself. And that ties in with one thing that really resonated from when I got to see you speak a few weeks ago, and that was not only the importance of making promises, but also the importance of not making a promise when you in theory shouldn't. And I was actually thinking about this recently because I had a circumstance with a client where I had made them a promise in February that I had to deliver on in June. And I remember thinking back in February, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, or I'm going to be able to like keep up to this. But you know what? That's 4 months away. I'm going to make it work somehow. Ultimately, I did, but I couldn't help but thinking back to your talk of I wish I would have phrased it in a way, and you phrased it so well, and I won't kind of steal it away from you, but of being able to say something along the lines of I don't want to make a promise that I won't be able to keep, and that
Yeah.
helps maintain all of the integrity because you talk about the promises that you just made of walking across Ohio and donating 9 million or $9 million and volunteering at 52 charities every single week. Those are extremely lofty promises, but that also means that there are many promises that I'm sure you did not make while still managing the personal brand that you've built and the integrity of the entire, not even just organization, but in the entire philosophy of because I said I would by not making certain promises. And I wonder if you can talk about that a little.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a old proverb, chase two rabbits and you'll catch neither. Um, when we say this thought of having a courage of no, when we say that go-to sentence, you're referring to like, I respect you too much to make a promise I can't keep. It seems like we're shirking away from responsibility, right? That even in that sense, I respect you too much to make a promise I can't keep. Well, if you respect me enough, then respect me enough to do the thing, right? There's traps everywhere when it comes to saying no. But I very genuinely believe that when we draw these these healthy lines, it isn't in this sort of obsession of self-care where like everything is about me and like I got to protect like my mental health. Obviously, we focus on resiliency skills and mental health. We have a licensed professional clinical counselor on staff full time. We believe deeply in taking care of yourself. But I'm not even saying that when it's courage and no. I'm saying that if you have a project, a goal, whatever it may be, that is half done and it never makes it over the finish line, that's 50 units of work, effort, sacrifice that will never pay dividends. It's not complete. Do you see what I'm saying? We are operating our lives with a shelf of a bunch of half done stuff, burning a quarter of our, awake existence on things that just don't ever happen, you know? So when we say no to someone, that wasn't going to happen anyway, we're just stopping a compound interest of disappointment from occurring. And it's hard. People don't want to hear no. I think of the movie, what is it, Anchorman, where it's like a gif at this point where he says, I don't believe you, like right to someone's face. And we laugh because like you would never say that. Even if it was true, you just never be that transparent. So there's all this discomfort with, saying no, but there's ways around that in a respectful way. This isn't going to happen anyway. You should probably just focus your time on actually finish these other things. And so in net, you actually get more done because I think with the state of the world, as it has always been, there is so much pain and suffering that we cannot hide from responsibility. So I don't think we should just go around saying no to everything. I just would say no so that this yes actually happens on another promise.
I would think though, Alex, in order to do that, you've got to be pretty in tune with what those priorities should be. right? And so when you know you're saying yes to something, you know you're going to be saying no to something else. But are you saying yes to the right things and no to the right things? So
Yeah.
how do you kind of square that also?
Yeah. I love a good quote or whatever, but people would live by their priorities better if they knew what they were, you know? I mean, I even struggle in my own organization, right? I have project management software because, I'm a bit of a nerd and you drag and drop these cards and stuff. And it's still hard to get people, new employees into the discipline. And it's understandable, right? Again, just a very common challenge. Um, but what I like to do is, again, even in personal life, is the value complexity matrix, right? So you have a x-axis, y-axis. One represents high to low complexity, like how difficult is this? And then the other one is value to your life, low to high value. And it's just, just like a quadrant kind of thing. And you do nothing more complex than just putting post-it notes and say, it's like, is this high? Okay, high value, but low complexity. Okay, medium complexity, but high value. And you just plot out, you know, some post-it notes according to those two dimensions. And you just get yourself to a better spot of what you really think your priorities are. I actually think in a linear fashion, prioritization is hard. If anything, I would do three axes and there'd be another component there, but that's kind of getting weird. So we'll keep it at two. But what's the value? What is the complexity? And just plot it on a little graph. I think again, this is like a very standard business practice. Well, it's at least said in business. I don't actually think people do these things, by the way. Like, I don't think a lot of businesses are sitting there and executing what we know to work. But how often have you, with your significant other, with son or daughter, like had a conversation? It's like, what do you think? Is this where we're at? Like, are we as a husband and wife or whatever, husband and husband, wife and wife, like, do we agree that this is what our team is going after? I've essentially never heard of that. But these are the type of resiliency skills and mental health habits that we teach in schools and prisons, at our camp, with grieving families, all these different types of moments of resiliency. It doesn't hurt.
So, Alex, you mentioned the camp, and you've talked a little bit about it, and 92 acres and larger than the entire Disneyland property. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more of that, because in a way, this is an attraction in and of itself, and
Yeah.
would love if you could tell us what was kind of how it was started, and maybe just a little bit of the process of getting it off the ground.
Ooh, I mean, we do have like a professionally designed escape room, a nine-hole disc golf course, a nine-hole foot golf course, a 2-acre vineyard, and a mile of forest trails, blah blah blah. So all the things that attraction pros, they got their list that I'm sure they kind of throw out there to capture attention. I've had to get used to that as well. But Josh, you mentioned this thought of like origin. Like, how do you get to that point where you're going to start something like that? Whether a classic attraction or something a little different, like ours as a camp. In the pandemic, before the pandemic, I had 17 full-time employees, like 4 part-time, so 21, some number like that, a bunch of volunteers. And we had programs in schools and prisons. And then I was doing, 135 of these speeches like you guys saw at the association. But the pandemic obviously shut down programs in schools and prisons, speeches, very reasonable health concerns. When your average audience is like 850 people, you can't, do stuff at that moment. And so there was a point where my friends and family members and supporters, they just pat me on the back and say, Alex, it was a good run, you know, there's nothing you can do about this, right? It's like this, all the dimensions of everything you're doing don't align with existing anymore for now or forever. And it's okay, right? Um, but we teach resiliency skills, and I ain't giving up for nothing. So what we did was multiple things. One, I said, well, we're good at volunteers. So we created the state of Ohio's probably largest volunteer face mask sewing operation. The hospitals didn't have masks. Like, that was the level we were talking about, not later on in the, political challenges and things. I'm saying, like, obviously hospitals need masks to run their operations. So we started doing that. We said, well, we're okay with fundraising. So we paid for funeral expenses for families who had lost loved ones to COVID. we taught resiliency skills. So we're like, okay, who could use this kind of leadership-ish type of thing? Well, we're losing 1 million jobs a month, right? And so there's a direct correlation to suicide and unemployment. And so we said, okay, well, we'll create a resilient leaders certificate online. I'll do 6 of these workshops on stress management, 4 types of self-control, accountability, best practices, goal setting patterns, like, well, all these things. And then so someone could sit in their next interview and say, hey, listen, I've been working on myself and not give up that hope. So, we created all these things, but the reason why I give that context is that, like, guys, we were like way down there. Like it was, we were scraping the ground, and we had to try to pull this plane up. And so, I went to business school. Shout out to Ohio University, greatest academic institution in the universe. And at business school, they taught me on some day, economic cycles. Things go up and down, and it seems hopeless, but things can rebound. So I talked to our largest donor, and I said, hey, if this is anything like history would suggest, it's going to get very bad, but then it'll rebound eventually. We don't know when that's going to be, but if we started looking at properties now, could we protect this organization? Could we create an infrastructure, an asset where, because I said it would last 100 years, long after I'm gone, right? Is that possible? So that if anything like this were to ever happen again, and forget about pandemic, but just economic cycles or whatever, that's what we did. That donor gave $750,000. We purchased camp because I said I would, and that was in 2023. It took about a year to negotiate everything because these things take a while to do, but it was really that thought that this asset could not only, of course, make an impact, but enable our survival in many different ways. So that's kind of how we came to the weird thought of creating our own, attraction. And yeah.
Well, and Alex, thank you for sharing that context. And you and I talked a little bit about that at the Florida Attractions Association. You said if you're ever doing retreats and things like that. So I do want to share, I don't know if you can see this, it says, I will host an in-person retreat in 2026. I've been talking to your folks about doing it at camp because I said I would. So
Nice.
super excited about that. So I thought you'd, enjoy that kind of full circle moment there.
Well,
Yeah.
it means a lot to us because just like anybody running an attraction, like everyone thinks it's so much fun. Oh, I'm going to build this whole thing and it's going to be great. I mean, you even talk to your friends and families like, you work where? You do what? And when I was starting camp, they were like, oh, this is going to be amazing. That's so much fun, right? I'm like, no, that's not going to be fun. It's like 11 buildings and it takes 3.5 days to cut the grass, dude. Like it's just like every, lodging, clogged toilets and, turnover. I got to clean all these rooms in the same day because it's actually not very easy to run a physical facility, but it is the most impactful. And pardon the seriousness of what I'm going to say, gentlemen, but our supporters in some cases are writing promises like, I will not kill myself. And so we need more time to work with them to build those resiliency skills, those mental health habits. It cannot be done in a 45-minute workshop. And so, that's why I'm so appreciative of corporate retreats, nonprofit retreats, people who come and work on their strategy with us, develop their employees through leadership development, programming, and all that kind of stuff, because 100% of those proceeds go to the nonprofit. And to cover the cost of so many things, including, cutting the grass, which I wish I could make a promise to the HOA's landscapers to not cut grass during this exact conversation. But the point is generosity is a terrible business model, unfortunately, right? And trying to cover all of this stuff, helping all these people, grieving families with just donations, the equation just simply does not work. And so we just had a wedding at camp. 100% of the proceeds go there. These corporate treats, a whole host of them this summer. And if it were up to me, I probably would never do corporate retreats or weddings. It's not that's like a bad thing. Of course, it's not. It's just like I want to be as mission focused as possible. But with that, you got to pay the bills. And what's the difference between hosting a gala or a golf outing? I mean, these things have nothing to do with the charity. What's the difference between doing things like that to raise money and then or hosting a corporate retreat? At the end of the day, if it brings in for the charity, that's what nonprofits have always had to do, and why I'm so appreciative, Matt, of that commitment and interest.
So, Alex, we're coming close to the end of our time here, but in kind of these final couple of minutes here, I'm wondering if there's maybe a challenge you can give to our audience. If there's maybe a low stakes promise that maybe they'd be able to take away from this interview that can be something to look forward to, or something that, once this episode is done, they can start taking action on. It doesn't need to be, changing the world or anything, but what would be a low stakes promise that you could challenge our audience with?
Yeah, yeah. Let's go with just the recognition of negative thinking patterns. Okay. So there are four types of negative thinking patterns: focusing on the negative, all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, and negative self-labeling. Now there's more than that, but let's just keep it kind of simple to the most common ones. So focusing on the negative is registering negative things in a way that is out of balance with reality. Let's say we go to Cedar Point, right, which I just went to a few weeks ago, right? This is $1 billion enterprise designed for a child's enjoyment, right? But let's say on this day, your kid or whatever, niece or nephew, they everything's perfect, but they take that ice cream cone and they drop it, right? Oh, the whole world melts with it, right? No matter how good everything is, you're focusing on the negative in a way that is out of balance with reality. Um, and why do we do that? It's because negativity keeps us safe, right? Don't eat that berry; it could be poisonous, right? Don't go off to those strangers; they could hurt you. Don't do that. That could break your leg. Whatever it is, right? Like we need negative thinking, but we do it in a way that's out of balance with reality. So that's one. The second is all or nothing thinking, right? It's either perfect or it's nothing, right? And we actually see this on a wedding day, right? It's like everything's got to be perfect, or otherwise, this whole bridezilla or groomzilla moment kind of comes up, and so that's not really reasonable. Done is better than perfect because perfect is never done. Catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is a set of dominoes, right? Something small happens, and then it's going to affect this, and then I'm going to lose my job, and then I'm going to lose my house, and then my marriage is over. And catastrophizing is again a natural human reaction, but maybe not something we should always do. And then negative self-labeling. Negative self-labeling is taking a challenge that may be very real or even physical, but wrapping your whole identity around that challenge probably is no way to live. So the habit I'm going to share, or the thought, Josh, is just to recognize that it is natural to have negative thoughts, but you can have thoughts and not believe them, right? So just try to almost say out loud or in your head, "Oh, I'm catastrophizing. Oh, I'm just focusing on the. Oh, this is negative self-labeling, right?" And zoom out a bit. You don't always have to act on these feelings. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but that's an example of a program that we do in the school with teens in middle schools as well, in prisons at our camp, and Matt, maybe even with your folks, we'll do a workshop when you come down there, because you got to be able to understand and balance these emotions when you're trying to be a leader or just getting through everyday life.
Absolutely, Alex. That's such a great lesson to kind of leave us on. And I wish we had more time, but we are going to have to wrap this up. But Alex, if people want to know more about Because I Said I Would, or get in touch with you, where would you send them?
Yeah. Check out becauseisaidawould.org, or camp.becauseisaidawould.org if you're interested in that. Follow us on social media at Because I Said I Would on most accounts. But the biggest thing I would say as a takeaway, as much as I'd love to work with everybody who hears this and, whatever other kind of self-centered comments I have, chances are you'll listen to this episode and, we won't do anything related to the charity. We'll never hear or talk to each other. It's fine. That's just the statistical reality. So don't worry about supporting us too much. Just follow through on your own promises, right? Do that audit. What is something that you need to go back to? Not always that next commitment, but you do that and you're part of this cause as anybody would be. So thank you again.
That's awesome. Thank you, Alex. And I've got my promise card about recognizing negative thinking. So thank you for giving that to us and to our audience as well. And I just want to thank you for your time. And once again, your story is very inspirational, and your mission is just fantastic. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today to just share just everything about it. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.